In the early morning of June 15, 1940, the 211th Regiment of the German 71st Infantry Division crossed the Meuse River, pursuing the retreating French army. The advance had already been slowed for several days, and any further delay would not only mean arriving late, but could disrupt the rhythm of the entire front line. At that moment, Battalion Commander Douaumont led his troops, braving heavy fire, inching closer to the fortress on the opposite bank. After several rounds of demolition, a breach was created, and the gateway to Verdun was opened. When a soldier asked him why he was so skilled, he patted the concrete and simply said, "I was here 20 years ago." The division commander added, "That's the Douaumont fort." However, what truly made Douaumont fort memorable was not its capture in 1940, but the event in 1916. When it was first taken, it wasn't so much a battle of attrition as a surrender that felt more like it was walked into. To understand this, we need to go back to why it was built in the first place. In 1871, France lost the Franco-Prussian War and was forced to sign the Treaty of Frankfurt, ceding large territories of Alsace and Lorraine. The old border was effectively nullified, and the route to Paris became more vulnerable. The French faced a very direct problem. If Germany attacked again, how would they defend themselves? There wasn't enough money to build a long, continuous defensive line. So Rivière, an engineering officer, proposed a different approach. Instead of completely sealing the border, build a series of fortresses at key strategic locations. These fortresses would support each other, constantly harassing the invaders with firepower. Once the enemy's advance slowed down, mobile units would then engage in open combat. In short, the fortresses would hold the line, and the mobile units would counterattack. In this system, Verdun was chosen as the core. It was a crucial transportation and geographical node, and Douaumont Fort was placed on the highest point southeast of Douaumont Village, a nearly 400-meter-high hill, offering a clear field of fire in all directions, blocking the road to the east and guarding the transportation corridor to Paris in the west. It wasn't an isolated building, but the most prominent bolt in the entire defensive system. Fort Douaumont itself was of an exaggerated scale, approximately 400 meters east-west and 300 meters north-south, in an irregular, hexagonal shape. The early main structure was built with limestone walls, covered with rammed earth. The outer perimeter also had a dry moat about 14 meters wide and 6 meters deep, accessible only by a drawbridge. The fort's gun emplacements, barracks, infirmary, and ammunition depots were connected by passages, and there were also water sources and storage spaces underground, theoretically capable of supporting a large garrison for a long period. However, technological advancements quickly rendered what looked sturdy obsolete. By the end of the 19th century, the power of artillery shells had increased dramatically, and the protection offered by traditional brick and rammed earth fortifications quickly became insufficient. France conducted tests, and the conclusion was brutal. New shells could penetrate the old defenses. Therefore, Fort Douaumont had to be continuously reinforced and modified, using reinforced concrete to add protection, upgrading the gun emplacements, and transforming it into a concrete fortress that could better withstand modern artillery fire. The fort's strength came from long-term investment and continuous upgrades, not from being completed in a single construction phase. In February 1916, Verdun became the place where the German army wanted to force France into a decisive battle. After the intense bombardment tore through the first line of defense, the German army finally encountered what they believed to be the strongest fortress in Europe, Fort Douaumont. Common sense dictated that taking such a target would require a huge price. But something unbelievable happened. On the afternoon of February 25th, Sergeant Kunze of the German 24th Infantry Regiment led a small team of engineers on a support mission, clearing the way for the infantry and assisting their advance. Snow, fog, and artillery fire combined to create chaos, scattering the troops, and they lost contact with the main force. Even worse, their own artillery barrage was advancing forward, forcing them to constantly dodge the shelling, getting further and further off course. In the evening, this small detachment accidentally stumbled into the dry moat outside Fort Douaumont. In the moat, they discovered a blown-out firing port that led into the interior of the fortress. Kunze observed an anomaly. There was no sustained return fire from outside the fort, and the cannons were unusually silent. This silence led him to a conclusion. Either there were very few soldiers inside, or command and defense had broken down. He left most of his men outside on guard and went in with a small group. Inside the fort, there was no fierce battle as expected, but rather disorganization and scattered resistance. Kunze groped his way through the corridors, first securing a gun emplacement and forcing several busy French soldiers to surrender. He then accidentally stumbled into a room where more soldiers were gathered. In the instant the explosion shattered the lights, he retreated in the darkness, quickly bolting the door behind him, trapping the men inside. Scattered prisoners, scattered resistance, scattered chaos. but no complete defensive system. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Rotke and his men also entered from the outside, confirming that the fort's defenses were far weaker than imagined. By that evening, the German army had reached a conclusion they themselves could hardly believe. Fort Douaumont had been captured, and this process had occurred with almost no significant fighting. When the news reached France, the shock was not about losing a fortification, but that the fort had not been breached, but rather lost in an almost accidental way. The reason was not complicated. The French army had downgraded it themselves. In the early stages of the war, the Belgian forts quickly collapsed under heavy artillery fire, shaking the French High Command's confidence in fixed fortification systems. Commander Joffre further reduced the importance of the forts. Many were considered secondary targets, and ammunition and artillery were concentrated elsewhere, leaving only minimal armament. By the summer of 1915, Fort Douaumont's arsenal had been emptied, and most of its cannons had been removed. At its lowest point, the garrison consisted of only a few dozen men, and the massive structure was only symbolically patrolled. Even worse, German shelling had cut off the fort's communication with the outside world. The defenders inside received no clear orders and continued their routine of sporadic sorties and occasional return fire, creating the illusion that the fort was still operational. After the capture, the Germans quickly repaired and reinforced the fort, allowing Fort Douaumont to resume its role in providing firepower and cover. It transformed from a fortification unexpectedly seized into a stubborn thorn in the side of the Verdun battlefield. French artillery bombardments and infantry assaults followed one after another, but they found that removing it would come at an unbearable cost. The attacks in a short period inflicted heavy losses on the front lines, leading to a brutal consensus. Failing to capture it would result in even more deaths. Capturing it would also demand a massive price. On the night of May 8th, a more absurd turn of events occurred on the battlefield. A chain of accidents unfolded inside the fort. Dangerous materials such as fuel and ammunition were stored too close together, and mishandling in the chaos led to a fire that spread and triggered explosions. The fort's organized defensive capabilities were destroyed in a short time. French commando teams, under the cover of artillery fire and the ensuing chaos, approached the entrance, infiltrated the fort, and briefly occupied key positions. When the surrounding German troops arrived as reinforcements, the personnel on site were covered in soot and difficult to identify, leading to misjudgments and friendly fire, further escalating the situation. However, due to the limited number of French troops, the damaged internal structure of the fort, and difficulties in maintaining ammunition and communication, the Germans quickly launched a counterattack and recaptured the fort. The fighting continued back and forth for several days until German engineers managed to repair critical sections, finally stabilizing the front line. The true end came in October 1916. The prolonged struggle had damaged the fort's structure, and the French decided to use heavier firepower to resolve the situation. In late October, the French concentrated heavy artillery fire, firing hundreds of thousands of shells. Casualties also numbered in the tens of thousands, with slightly different figures depending on the source. Finally, the French re-entered the fort, and the fighting became so fragmented that every room had to be fought for. During this phase, Fort Douaumont became one of the most iconic symbols of the hellish nature of the Verdun battlefield. By the end of the war, the area looked as if it had been turned inside out. The moat's outline was blurred, large areas of the gun emplacements were destroyed, and the nearby village of Douaumont had almost disappeared from the surface, leaving only shell craters and shattered concrete. Statistics on the casualties at Verdun and Fort Douaumont vary, but one point is almost undisputed. Both the German and French armies paid an extremely heavy price for this fort. It transformed from a war machine into a painful memory, and was later redefined as a historical site and a warning. During World War II, Fort Douaumont was captured again. Years later, when people returned to the ruins, they gained a clearer understanding of its twofold irony in history. Reinforced concrete could withstand artillery shells, but it could not withstand misjudgment and strategic shifts. On November 25, 1970, France designated Fort Douaumont as a historical monument and placed it under protection. The restored site attracts a large number of tourists every year, and France and Germany also hold commemorative ceremonies there. In the new chapel at the end of the tour route, murals depict the peaceful life of Douaumont village before the war, reminding people that the normality of this land in the past is what is most worth preserving.